Geordie, I'm hoping you're going to be able to fill me in on some recent developments with your next segment, because I was reading the newspaper the other day, which I wouldn't recommend to anyone. I wouldn't recommend any of our audience read the Advertiser. It's not great. But I was getting a gist of the headlines and some of the editorials while I was reading them.
Yep.
And, mate, is Albanese essentially in line with the Chinese Communist Party? Is he betraying Australian values and Australian freedom and democracy?
Well, James, we'll get into that. However, yeah, it could be argued that he could be pandering to the Chinese.
Pandering.
Albanese's just got back from a 6-day trip in China.
Yeah.
Obviously following in the footsteps of Gough Whitlam, who first established relationships with the People's Republic of China.
Yep.
First was to recognise them. Albo obviously went to the Great Wall, met with the pandas, a lot of photos reminiscent of Gough Whitlam's initial trip.
That sounds pretty fun, to be honest. Do you reckon he's having a good time?
I imagine he's having a good time. The opposition here in Australia have obviously dubbed it as being indulgent.
Yeah.
Which, look, I can't blame him for indulging in Chinese culture while he's over there.
Yep.
However, it was an interesting trip, notable for a few reasons. I'll get into that. I just wanted to start this segment off, James, by actually asking you a couple of questions.
Yes.
So on Albo's 6-day trip, he went to Shanghai first, went to Beijing, and then finished in Chengdu. I just want to ask you, James, do you know the population of Shanghai?
I'd imagine it is... Look, I don't know the exact population. Yeah. I'm going to hedge what I think is a safe bet and say that it is larger than the population of Australia.
It's about the same. 25 million people.
Wow. There you go.
And Beijing, James?
Well, I would estimate it's in the same realm.
About 22.
Yeah, wow. All right.
And Chengdu? It's actually smaller, James. It's 21 million.
A more manageable 21 million.
We're looking at almost 70 million people.
Yeah.
Living in 3 major cities. Really developed, massive, urbanised cities.
Yeah.
So I just want to put that out as a little bit of context and kind of a reference point to think about when we're talking about this. Albanese went to China. The trip obviously was notable for a few reasons. Firstly, he met with Premier Li Qiang.
Yeah.
Sorry about my pronunciation. I'll do the best that I can here. He met with Li Qiang for their 3rd annual leaders meeting. And then he also met with Xi Jingping, the president of China and the leader of the Communist Party. So Li is the 2nd ranking member of the party's Politburo. This is the kind of 7, I believe, most significant figures within inside the Communist Party.
Yeah, like a high council type
Correct.
thing. Yeah.
So this also means that Li serves as not just the premier, the head of the Chinese state, but also the 2nd ranking member inside the party itself. And then Albanese also sat down for his 4th face-to-face meeting with President Xi Jingping. This is worth noting because Albanese wasn't just simply meeting with minor bureaucrats and officials and people from the private sector. Albanese actually was sitting down with 2 of the most influential people, not just in China, but I would argue in the world and in the developing global economy.
Of course, yeah, because we see, I'd imagine, and you'd probably be able to educate me on this, imagine a man like Xi Jinping is a very busy man and his time would be very, very valuable. Because when you follow kind of lots of international developments, typically when heads of state meet with Chinese leadership, not many of them actually seem to meet with Xi themselves.
Yes.
So they'll meet with, Li Qiang, pardon my pronunciation, or like Wang Wenbin, for example,
the
foreign minister.
Yeah.
So obviously this is a big deal, not just for Australia, but for China as well.
Yeah, definitely. And for any country, as you mentioned, not just to meet with the foreign minister or a minor party or state official, but actually sit down with the president himself.
The man.
And discuss the relationships between Australia and China. So
can I ask, why? Yeah. What was the purpose? Was he just going over there on an indulgent tourist visit to eat his fill of dumplings and hot pot, like the mainstream media would have us believe?
Well, I was going to say, if you believe the mainstream media, then that's exactly what he was doing. No,
I can't blame him.
This is part of as I mentioned, the annual Leaders Summit that Premier Li and Albanese have been partaking. And it also represented the continuation of what the Albanese government has dubbed the stabilisation of relationships between Australia and China.
Yeah.
So in the first administration, that we saw over the past couple of years.
In his first term.
Over the past couple of years, Albanese and the Labor Party have really put a lot of effort into trying to stabilise the relationship. Obviously, this is in stark contrast to the coalition, especially under Scott Morrison, where the relationship deteriorated to the point where the Chinese placed $20 billion worth of economic sanctions on Australia.
Mm-hmm.
Most notably, we saw like barley, lobster, wine being restricted into China. And for, I believe, just over a year, all diplomatic ties between the two nations broke down.
That seems like a pretty big kerfuffle, shall I say, considering they are our largest trading partner, to put it lightly.
Correct. So this trip was seen as a kind of pivot from, in my opinion, stabilising the relationship to trying to build on it and moving forwards and then developing the relationship potentially into something else. So I just want to probably begin by talking about the economy, because this is the centrepiece of the relationship between Australia and China. China represents about 30% of all of Australia's exports and about $200 billion of exports.
Wow, yeah.
So it is a massive portion of Australia's trade.
So it makes sense to have a good bilateral diplomatic relationship.
Yeah, definitely, as with any country really, but especially with one of our largest trading partners. So during Albanese's meeting with Lee, the two signed 6 agreements which seek to promote economic ties within tourism, agriculture and renewable energies, areas that Australia and China have well-established areas of economic cooperation. They reviewed the decade-old bilateral free trade agreement, which is the cornerstone of Australia's trade relationship with its largest trading partner. So this free trade agreement's over 10 years old, and they basically were reviewing it, going over it and looking at how we can then build upon that in the future. In case you weren't aware, Australia provides China also with about 2/3 of the iron ore that it uses for steel.
Of course.
So if you look at China and its industrialization over the past few decades, all the steel that has built modern-day China has come from Australian iron ore. And we have massive reserves of that iron ore.
Of good quality iron ore, I believe, as well.
I'll get to that in a moment.
Yeah.
So it shouldn't be surprising that the executives from the Australian mining companies, such as Rio Tinto, BHP, Fortescue Metals and Hancock Prospecting, accompanied Albanese in his discussions in Shanghai, as well as senior officials from the Australian Business Council. That is Australia's penultimate business lobby.
Yes.
So the big CEOs from the mining sector and from the Australian business sector were there with Albanese in Shanghai. Notably, the former CEO and mining billionaire Andrew Forrest was present, and he actually was singled out and asked questions by a journalist about the security threat that China poses, and he just kind of pushed down the journalist and said, look, we're here for economic relations. Yeah. And he goes, it's through these relations as well that countries do develop. He kind of has the stereotypical liberal outlook that through economic relations, peace will foster, which, hey, there might be some truth in that.
I think in this scenario, that's definitely the case, I think.
For sure. However, what I wanted to highlight is that as the world economy begins to decarbonise, Australia could risk losing $100 billion in tax revenue because the production of steel is carbon intensive, and China is one of the leading nations trying to decarbonise its economy, and it's seeking higher grade iron ore from countries such as Brazil and Guinea. So the meeting in Shanghai saw Albanese try and stipulate a vision where Australian ore providers would process the iron ore using renewable technologies in Australia to produce green iron ore that is then used in the production of green steel. So basically, they process the iron ore here. It creates green iron ore. I'm not going to go into details of how this happens. And then that would then be passed on to the Chinese to produce a cleaner form of steel. That is good because it means that we're not just selling a raw commodity, we're processing it and adding value to it before it's then sold to the Chinese.
Then exported,
So I think that was a good thing going into the future because it actually demonstrates that the government's thinking about, okay, how can we actually add value to our export sector and how can we securitize it in the face of climate change as well.
Correct. And that's actually been a topic that we have criticised the Australian government for a few times on this show, is that essentially we haven't added any value. We just dig allow the corporations to come in, dig the raw materials out the ground and ship them overseas, and we're missing out on a big chunk of that value chain there, where we could be investing in those processes ourselves here onshore.
Definitely. So while China remains the largest producer of greenhouse gases, without a doubt, it is also a global leader in transitioning away from fossil fuels towards cleaner energy technologies. In my opinion, Albanese and Australia's business class recognise this and want to ensure that Australia can accompany China and benefit from this seismic shift in the global economy that is taking place. Moreover, many of Australia's leading health and medical technology firms have a presence in China, where they manufacture products and have recently tapped into the Chinese market. One such firm, Cochlear Australia, was visited by the Prime Minister, a company with a market capitalisation of over $20 billion.
Oh, wow.
In the top 30 of the ASX, the Australian Stock Exchange.
Yeah. I imagine that's like a hearing aid cochlear implant development company that does research
correct.
and manufacturing. Yeah.
Until I was reading these articles, I didn't even know that existed. It is worth over $20 billion.
Yeah, I had no idea.
So there's no doubt that Albanese's visit was in part to shore up the economic relationship that was jeopardised by the previous Liberal government. In his remarks, Albanese kept referring to Australia's national interests that were found in the relationship. I find this point interesting because in many ways the national interests in reality are the interests of the major corporations, of the major mineral corporations and the Cochlear company that we just discussed.
Of course.
And these major corporations and executives handsomely benefit from the relationship between Australia and China. It's important to remember this and point it out because it does demonstrate how foreign policy is shaped by the major capitalist forces within inside a country.
That is true.
This, I think, is overlooked. I think the economic relationship probably does trickle down. It's good for many sectors of the Australian economy and for working people. However, we need to remember that this relationship does benefit the massive CEOs and executives that run the mineral sector here in Australia.
Of course. And it seems to me that that is often an aspect of our position that is overlooked in kind of the dog water media that we have, because they often talk about, lots of it is about the security our security relationship and our position in the Indo-Pacific, and obviously how lots of the kind of hawkish media often paints the picture that we must rely on the United States for our security. However, as you've kind of just aptly demonstrated and explained, that is completely works in opposition to our actual economic interests.
Yeah, definitely. And it's funny as well because the Liberal Party and the kind of ragtag media here in Australia are the first ones to criticise Albanese's trip. However, I would argue that it's the Liberal Party that really not necessarily just represent, but are funded by figures such as Gina Rinehart, Australia's like leading mining mogul. And it's this relationship with China that they benefit from.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? When you really kind of lay it out like that. Yeah.
No. It is, in my opinion, just posturing and playing politics. When I would argue at the moment, this trip kind of signifies that the Labor Party are a little bit more serious about diplomacy, should I say?
Yeah.
So during the initial stage of the trip to China, I'll start again, dude.
Please do. That's all right. That's all right.
So the beginning of Albanese's trip was overshadowed by some comments made by the Under Secretary of Defence in the Pentagon, James, Elbridge Colby.
Why does that not surprise me?
So I've mentioned a few times, we've discussed who Elbridge Colby is. Yeah. He is the man undertaking the review, the Pentagon's review into AUKUS. Yeah. He is a bit of a China hawk. And recently, he's rallied for Australia to lift its defence spending.
Of course. I can imagine what the outcome of his review would be. It'll be that we need to give them more money. Yeah. I'd imagine, I can almost guarantee that is what will be the outcome of that review.
So last week, the Financial Times reported that in private, Mr. Colby had been pressing Australia and Japan to commit to the US in the instance of a war between China and the US over Taiwan. Yeah. So at the moment, the US and Australian policy is the One China policy, obviously, where they both recognise Taiwan as a part of China. Yep. They both practice what's called a strategic ambiguity, where neither of them will say commit to protecting Taiwan or necessarily not committing. They kind of like to play this grey area. And Australia has for a long time supported no unilateral change to the status quo, meaning that the Australian government doesn't support either China, Taiwan, or the US changing the status quo, the one China policy, which that is the bipartisan policy here in Australia. Both the opposition and the government support that, and it is the policy in the US.
Yeah, well, it wouldn't really make much sense to one day wake up and just be like, all right, the Republic of China, based in Taiwan with Taipei as its capital, is the only one true government of China. You'd be a bit of an idiot, I think, to just get up and say that, essentially.
For sure. But let's be honest, this was a very cynical move, I think, by Elbridge Colby, because what he was trying to do was pin Albanese while he was in China to commit to defending Taiwan.
Yeah, again, repairing the diplomatic relations, and then you cop that on the other end.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I'm not going to torture you with any clips from Sky News or individuals such as Greg Sheridan.
Thank you very much.
Discussing the trip.
Yeah.
However, I did want to play a clip by Angus Taylor.
Yes.
This I thought was very fascinating.
Let's be clear about this because it's very important. Would the coalition be prepared to give Donald Trump a guarantee that Australia would join the US in a war over Taiwan?
Well, we need to have a joint commitment with the United States, regardless of who the president is, about peace in our region, and that means the security of Taiwan and peace through strength and deterrence in the Taiwan Strait. This has to be a priority. Now, does that mean you can codify your response in every possible scenario? Well, of course not, and no country can. But you can commit to those core principles that I've described. And this is exactly what the Prime Minister and the government should be doing. It's what I'm sure America is looking for, some indication that we do have that commitment to peace through deterrence.
To be clear, Angus Taylor, are you saying that the government should give a pre-commitment to the United States that Australia would take part in a war over Taiwan?
Well, Sarah, I think I've been pretty clear in saying that you can't codify for every possible scenario, but you can make principled commitments to the security of Taiwan, to peace through deterrence and capability in the Taiwan Strait.
But that's a different
and through
thing.
working together.
It's a different thing. A peace through deterrence is one thing. A pre-commitment to take part in an active live firing war is a different thing. Is that what you are asking the government to do?
Well, Sarah, I think I've been pretty clear. I mean, peace through deterrence and strength is incredibly important. That does mean you're prepared to act under certain circumstances. You can't codify all the scenarios as to how a conflict might unfold. It's not possible to do that. And no one, the Americans won't do that, and nor can we. But you can make those principled commitments as part of an alliance. And what's lacking right now is a commitment from this government to an alliance which has underpinned our security for many, many decades, which does require strength, and where the objective is peace, not war. The exact opposite. We don't want conflict. That's the whole point here. But you can avoid conflict by working together with strength and clarity and credibility, and that's what we need to see from the government.
So I'm not saying that we should make a commitment. However, we should make principled commitments towards an alliance in the case that, per se, China did invade Taiwan.
Because, look, I've been very clear about this. There is nothing clear about that statement at all. That is the most ambiguous, just ball of rhetoric I've ever heard. But even he, Geordie, is the opposition leader, and he's trying to...
He's not the opposition leader.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Pardon me. Sorry. He is in the opposition.
Correct.
Pardon me. I don't know how that man still has a job in government. But he's in, to get to my point, he's in opposition. So his whole thing here is to criticise the government for not being tough on China, but he actually can't say out loud what he's criticising them for not doing.
Yeah.
What a stupid scenario.
It's terrible.
That boggles the mind.
It also shows that the hawks within inside the coalition, the Liberal Party, are trying to push further and further and further towards changing the one China policy, committing Australia to the US in a potential hot war over Taiwan.
That's just, again, look, just looking at what you've laid out, again, with that brief analysis you gave us on our trading relationship with China. Again, what a terrible idea, dude.
Yeah, it's...
Does he not realise that everything is made in China?
Correct, that's exactly right.
Oh, my goodness, sorry.
No, that's right.
Angus Taylor, I find a particularly like foul and odious character, and he's just been hanging around for way too long, in my opinion.
He has.
But they do not have many other people of quality or of repute. Not that he is, but I think the fact that he is their person of quality and repute for the opposition says a lot.
No, it does.
Yeah.
It does.
Pardon me.
Look, I will bore you.
Yeah.
With just Angus Taylor.
Thank you.
I'm not going to play anything from Sky News because it's just full of the standard kind of tropes. Albanese is pandering to the Chinese. He's being subservient to Xi Jinping.
He's a Manchurian candidate.
Et cetera, et cetera. Look, we could probably just come up with them right.
Yeah, absolutely.
We don't actually need to sit there and watch.
Yeah, a real Australian eats meat pies, not dumplings.
That's right. However, what I wanted to point out is that it's actually the US at the moment and the Trump administration that's pushing countries closer and closer to China. It's not just necessarily Australia trying to cozy up with China.
Yeah.
So we've seen, obviously, the tariff war that Trump's been orchestrating at the moment, the 10% blanket tariffs on Australia. And then just last week, it came out that there potentially could be anywhere up to a 200% tariff against Australian pharmaceutical exports to the US.
Yeah.
So as the US is doing this, what do you think other countries are going to do?
I think this just logically, it becomes apparent to them that it's in their best interests to pursue a more comprehensive trading relationship with China instead of the US.
Correct. And it plays into the Chinese perfectly because they can say, well, no, we don't want to follow these protectionist policies. We want to have a open trading system. We want to promote free trade, et cetera, et cetera. And it works really well for them.
I find it hilarious that now China, run by the Chinese Communist Party, are stronger advocates of global free trade than the United States. What a world we live in.
And in fact, just last week, James, the British journalist Ambrose Evans Pritchard, writing for the Daily Telegraph, which is your standard kind of Murdoch right-wing ragtag, he had this to say. So, quote, China's leaders must be wondering whether they are hallucinating or whether America's political class really has lost its mind, committing economic and geopolitical self-harm on a breathtaking scale. Donald Trump's big, beautiful bill makes a wholesale retreat from swaths of advanced manufacturing and energy technology. It abandons a central front of the Sino-American superpower contest without a fight.
So just backing out of the kind of the economic contest, and I guess you'd kind of logically assume that they're going to posture up on the military side of things.
Yes.
And take an even stronger stance there.
Quite potentially. And this is what we're seeing in real time. As Trump and the US empire decay and fracture in real time, China is using this moment to promote better global trade relations and play the role of the mature and stable power that promotes multilateralism. What the China hawks in Australia cannot understand is that Australia's subservience to the US and any potential confrontation with China undermines our national interests. That is, that Australia is not the 51st state of America, nor are we in Western Europe. We are part of Asia. And as Paul Keating, Australia's former Prime Minister, has said, foreign policy is what Australia does with the great powers in the system, and that we must seek security in Asia, not from Asia. And in many ways, I think that's what Albanese has in part achieved by stabilising the relationship and continuing to engage with China, or in his words, cooperate where we can, disagree where we must, and engage Australia's national interest. This message by Albanese in some ways mirrors the approach by nations back in the Cold War.
Yeah.
So I was reading an article and I just wanted to finish on this. So China's first premier, Zhou Enlai, famously said, "Seek common ground while reserving differences." And in this type of level-headed and measured diplomacy, this is what Australia is doing with China.
Absolutely. Yeah. Look, man, that was a really good breakdown.
Yeah.
And I guess we'll be, like you said, as the US empire decays in real time, we'll be watching this progression and we will be able to see how it unfolds. And I think, as you've kind of pointed out, this is going to be potentially kind of a seismic shift in the global order. And it's going to be very fascinating to watch.
For sure.
Yeah.
Definitely. All right, James, we'll leave it there.
Thank you very much, mate. If everyone likes the content, like, comment, subscribe, drop a comment, give us some feedback. We will see you all next time.
Thanks.
Hugs and kisses. Strong segment. That was a strong segment. That was good. I like that. That was good. Dude, we could just talk about, like, I think we could just talk about fucking strategic posturing in the Indo-Pacific